Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my Star Trek Top 100 number 2. We are all the way up to number 2. But let's not mess around this time. Let's jump straight to the picture clue. I don't even have to explain what a picture clue is. You all should know by now. So let's get that bitch up here on the screen. Let's look at the picture clue that I gave you for my number 2. Here we go. So we've got Adam Sandler as the wedding singer. We've got an apostrophe S next to him and a ship of some sort. So I have 2 shout outs to give. One's a partial shout out, a half shout out to Matty Jester, who gets partial credit. He did get the correct answer, but he did not fully get the reasoning as to why this was the correct answer. He got half of the reasoning. He was able to deduce that that is the World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise. And so he got the correct answer from there, but he did not understand what the Adam Sandler represented. So I can't give you full credit for that. Liz Scott, however, nailed it. Liz Scott, this is your second one that you've nailed. Good job. Liz Scott knew that the picture of Adam Sandler from The Wedding Singer represents his famous line from that film where he says, "This is something you might have brought to my attention yesterday." Like, that's his famous line. Although I honestly did not know if anyone really knew that line as well as my brother and I do. My brother and I quote that line all the time. In fact, I don't even know if we can say the word yesterday without going, yesterday. Like, that's his line. So if I saw that picture, somebody else did it, I would immediately still thought yesterday's Enterprise because I would have saw that and going, yesterday. So congratulations, Liz. So yes, Adam Sandler means yesterday. Apostrophe S, yesterday's Enterprise. So good job, Liz, and partial good job to Manny Jester as well. That brings us to my number 2 in my Star Trek Top 100 yesterday's Enterprise from Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3. So in a couple minutes, I will go through beat by beat and really get into the details of every scene and why I just think this episode is one of the best episodes of Star Trek ever made. In fact, within the legacy track realm, it is number 2. Out of all of those 800 episodes, it is number 2, is my second favorite episode. But I want to talk about one important reason why I have this ranked so high. And that is because this is a pivotal episode in Star Trek history. This is the episode that put the Next Generation on the map as far as how good it was. Now, I said before that Best of Both Worlds put it on the map as far as recognizing the show, or the show getting recognition from people and getting popular. I think this is when the show became a great show. This is the growing the beard episode, if you will. I do hate that that phrase because it is inaccurate. Growing the beard refers to the second season of The Next Generation when Riker grows the beard, and that supposedly is when the show got good, but it's not. Season 2 still sucked. So to me, this is the true growing the beard episode. Now, some might point to the beginning of season 3 with the departure of Maurice Hurley, the arrival of Rick Berman, and then Michael Piller as the head writer, the return of Gates McFadden with the departure of Dr. Pulaski, the new uniforms, all those things. People may point to that as the growing the beard time, but to me, the beginning of season 3 is when Next Generation went from a bad show to a good show. But yesterday's Enterprise is when it went from a good show to a truly great show. And not that there weren't good episodes prior to this, but this was, at the time, the best episode ever produced for the Next Generation. And by my opinion, still the best episode ever produced by the Next Generation. But it's what comes after it. You put it in context. Starting with yesterday's Enterprise, the next 4 episodes of the show, I should say, in air date order, in season 3, are all in my top 100. So after this one, you get The Offspring, which was back at my number 32, the really touching episode with Data and his daughter. And I don't know how you watch that ending and not cry. Also kind of a follow-up to Measure of a Man and deals with a lot of the same issues, but in a new and innovative way. So truly great episode, number 32 on my list. And then we had Send to the Father was the next episode airing after that. I think that was my number 52. You guys will see it because it'll be on your screen and it'll say what number it is. But I'm not looking at that right now. So if I think it was number 52, you'll be able to see if I'm wrong or not. It was 50 something. Maybe it was 53. Send to the Father, that was the beginning of the Worf Disaccommodation storyline, first truly serialized storyline in the Next Generation. So another great episode. And then the episode after that, this is where, a lot of people will depart from me. Not everyone thinks this episode is as great as I do, but Allegiance, which I had at my number 65, also in my top 100. But even if you leave Allegiance off this list, you still got boom, Yesterday's Enterprise, boom, The Offspring, boom, Send to the Father. The Next Generation had never, ever had a series of episodes, a group of episodes that spectacular in a row in its history. And it very rarely would afterwards. I think the only time it even really comes close is season 6, but I think season 6 had like maybe 4 out of 5 episodes in a row that were really great or something like that. And I think like Aquiel was stuck in there in the middle of that. But a streak like this, even if you were to, take Allegiance out of there, which I don't. I count Allegiance. A streak like that, the Next Generation never done anything like that, and basically never would again. So this is when the show became great. Now, after Allegiance, we get Captain's Holiday, and the show kind of goes down and up again, which any Star Trek show that has 25, 26 episodes in a season, they always do that. You're going to have some up and down, which is why having 3 or 4 episodes that are really great in a row is so impressive, because that's very hard to do. The rest of the season, they sort of do go up and down and then end on a high note with The Best of Both Worlds Part 1, which, of course, was at my number 5. But to me, this is the Growing the Beard episode. Although, it should be called like something else. I don't know, like drinking the prune juice. Drinking the prune juice, though, is not as catchy as Growing the Beard. So we can't probably really use that one. It's not. I get it. Growing the Beard is catchy, but drinking the prune juice is more accurate. Although, really, if you're going to be even more accurate, the real moment where Next Generation got great is when Picard turns around and Tasha Yar is there. So the appearing of Tasha Yar, no, that you can't really make that into a catchphrase. So fine, Growing the Beard we'll go with. And if this sounds familiar to you, I gave a similar rant for my number 2 on my modern track list, which I thought was the Growing the Beard episode for Lower Decks. So I don't know what it is about my number 2s. These tend to be Growing the Beards episodes for their respective series. All right, so let us go ahead and go through this episode beat by beat with a recap with my thoughts, opinions, observations interjected in as I recap the episode. And let's go ahead and start from the beginning of the episode. All right, going through the episode now. Let's start with that opening scene, which I just alluded to moments ago, and that is when Worf is sitting down with Guinan and 10 Forward, and Guinan is introducing him to prune juice, which he calls a warrior's drink, while also kind of chatting with him about, he needs a girlfriend or whatever, and Worf is like, the women are too fragile, and stuff like that. Now, this scene almost seems a little tacked on, like it doesn't seem like it needs to be there on the surface, but I actually do think it does serve a purpose. I mean, other than just giving Michael Dorn something to do for the episode, it serves other purposes as well. A couple other purposes. For one, it demonstrates the contrast between our timeline when you have a Klingon serving on a Starfleet ship and drinking fruit juice and laughing with Guinan, and that other timeline when the Federation is at war with the Klingons. And the other purpose is this episode sets the stage for Guinan being a major player for the episode, and this is a huge Guinan episode. In fact, I think this is the best Guinan episode in the series. And Whoopi Goldberg nails it all throughout this episode. She knocks it out of the park. Now, as for Worf, they only have him in this scene and then at the very end of the episode. But I used to think that they should have had Worf be the enemy captain of the Klingon ship and the alternate timeline. In fact, when I first saw it, I thought for sure it was going to be Worf on that other ship, and it wasn't. But now, after having seen the Mirror Universe episodes in Deep Space Nine, where Worf was the captain or whatever, I forget what his title was in the Alliance. And just how ridiculously silly he was. I'm kind of soured on the old alternate Worf idea now. I think those episodes kind of ruined that for me. But more than that, I don't know if it would have been necessary. Like, why do we need Worf to be in that scene at the end there? I think that it kind of subtracts from the characters we're trying to focus on. And it would just be more like, ooh, look at it. Isn't that cool? Look, Worf's evil in this timeline. Like, you didn't really need to. So I've changed my mind on that. I used to think that when I was younger, but now I'm like, no, they probably made the best choice of not having Worf there. So if they're not going to have him there, then they got to have him somewhere. So here he is at the beginning of the episode. So then Worf is called away to the bridge with all the other senior officers. Then Guinan looks at the anomaly. You can see the anomaly out the window, and she says, no. What is she talking about? Why is she saying that? I to this day don't understand that. Has she experienced time anomalies before that changed the timeline? I mean, did she expect that to, I don't understand why she goes no when she sees that. No, it couldn't be. No, couldn't be. Why does she do that? I still do not get it. So then we get the best what the fuck moment, the best WTF moment in Star Trek history. I had the best closing scene, back at my number 5, Mr. Worf, fire. This is the best cold open for me. So first of all, I love how Picard is blocking the audience's view of Worf all throughout the scene. So when he turns around to talk to Worf, and then you see Worf back there, and he turns around and you can't see Worf again. I love how they did that. Because then the Enterprise C comes out of the anomaly. You see this whoosh, things change, and then he turns around and there's fucking Tasha Yar. Who was expecting that? Fucking Tasha Yar! What? And you're like, what is going on? And then we cut to Guinan and 10 Forward, and 10 Forward is different, and there's a whole bunch more people, and they seem to be bustling around and busy and ready to do something, and they have different uniforms. They all have these holsters with phasers on them, and everything looks different. and we see Guinan says, "This isn't right. Something's changed." And then we go back to the bridge where the magically appearing Tasha Yar reveals that the ship that has come through the anomaly is 1701C, the Enterprise. And I love how at this early stage in the series, the third season, that they trusted in their fans to get that there were two ships between Kirk's last ship, which was the Enterprise A in the films, and the Enterprise D. There were two ships in between. There's a C. So, because I do wonder how many casual fans were expecting this to be Kirk's ship, because they don't get that. But I love how the writers just like trusted in their fans that like, yeah, they know, they get it. In fact, that storyline was originally written by a fan, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So then we get the opening credits. We come back. Picard goes, "Military log, combat date, blah, 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 blah. This battleship." And, you know, he is using those kinds of terms. Yeah, this was the immediate predecessor to this battleship. So my first thought is they didn't do that shit in Dominion War. They didn't change what they call it. But when you think about it, they do say that this war has been happening for 20 years. So I suppose after 20 years of war, you start getting into a more militaristic mindset overall, and you might be doing military log and combat date and all that. So we'll buy it. The Dominion War wasn't that long. So I'm just joking around here. It's fine. So anyway, the point is, when he does this, it lets us know right away something is off. What is going on here? What is he talking about? Military log. There's some sort of alternate timeline. We've got those hints. Guinan says something is different, something has changed. And of course, we see Tasha Yar, so that appears to be some sort of alternate timeline. Then we go back to the bridge. We see Wesley wearing the red uniform, which he looks good in the red uniform. I wanted him to always be in the red uniform. Like, even when he wore that stupid blue thing that he started wearing in the second season, and he continued to wear it for the first half of the third season, that's dumb. Or most of the third season. When did he switch officially? I guess he switched officially in the fourth season to the red uniform. He looks so much better in the red uniform. Anyways, we know something's off. And then we get a little bit of exposition from Data about the Enterprise C. And the characters realize, oh, the Enterprise C has traveled through time. So Picard is even hesitant to help them at first because he's afraid of altering the timeline, of course, not realizing the timeline has already been altered. Like, he has no idea. He does agree to help them, but he says we must avoid any discussion of where or when they are, and there was 0% chance of them adhering to that. There was no way that was possible. If you're going to help them, they're going to find out. I mean, come on. When Riker goes over to the ship, Captain Garrett is demanding answers, like, what is going on here? Who are you? But Riker's really good at deflecting. He's like, we're from a Federation starship. We're here to help. And so they take, Dr. Crusher takes Captain Garrett back to the Enterprise D, to the sick bay. This is where Yar first meets Lieutenant Richard Castillo, Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore. I don't know what it is with all the Adam Sandler tie-ins to this episode. Now, that's where people most recognize this actor from, but this is actually 6 years before that movie came out, so he wasn't Shooter McGavin yet. But I did recognize this actor when I first saw this episode. So I actually didn't see this episode when it first aired in 1990. I would have seen it a year or two later, probably 2 years later. And at that point, I would have already seen him in Thelma and Louise. But I was looking over his TV show credits because I definitely recognize him from a bunch of TV shows as well. and I wouldn't have been able to tell you offhand which ones they were, but I was looking at his Wikipedia page and some of his TV credits, and he appeared in a few shows that I watch regularly. He appeared in Cheers, he appeared in Knight Rider, and he appeared in the 1986 version of Twilight Zone, all of which I would have recognized him from. And I do remember that even at this point, pre-Shooter McGavin, I thought of him as an actor who always played assholes or bad guys. So like he never played. It was weird seeing him feel nice in this episode. Still kind of is, even though I've seen this episode hundreds of times. But this actor, Christopher McDonald, generally almost always played assholes or villains. So it was weird that he plays a nice guy. But he sells it. And I'll talk about that more as we get into the Yar and Castillo relationship. Anyway, so we'll move on with Guinan now coming on to the bridge and telling Picard that this is all wrong. This is not the way it's supposed to be. Picard is getting frustrated with Guinan's lack of specification, but all she can tell him at this point is it's wrong. And Picard's like, same bridge, nothing has changed. And Guinan says, I know that, but I just know that it's wrong. And actually at this point, I said she went on the bridge, but there was a commercial, and then they moved into Picard's ready room at this point that they're having this conversation. And Guinan says there should be children and families, and Picard is like, what? Children on the Enterprise? Guinan, we're at war. And Guinan responds, no, we're not. Or at least we're not supposed to be. This is not a ship of war. This is a ship of peace. And I do love trying to think of this from Picard's perspective, because think of like our regular Picard, like the normal Picard, if a character came in and said, no, this is all wrong, like how he would react in the audience when we react with him. What do you mean this is all wrong? We've been watching this for 3 seasons or however many seasons it would be at that point. But here, we're seeing an alternate Picard. For as far as he knows, this is the only reality that's ever existed. And being told, no, we're not a ship of war, we're a ship of peace, this is all wrong. So I can kind of see where he's coming from. But Guinan does seem to get through to him at the very end when she says that ship is not supposed to be here. It has to go back. Now, not that he's made the decision to send it back at this point, but he seems to be thinking about it. This was a great scene. There's a lot of great scenes in this episode. Again, I will say again, Whoopi Goldberg's best episode, knocks it out of the park. Her and Patrick Stewart in the scene were incredible, and this was a really, really powerful scene. Then we move over to sickbay, and we see Picard talking to Captain Garrett, and he pretty much immediately confesses that they're in the future. I knew that wasn't going to last. It was really silly for him to be like, oh, we just won't tell them. Yeah, right. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. So, yeah, he's forced to fess up that Captain Garrett and her ship have traveled into the future. He learns that the Enterprise C was responding to a Klingon distress call from a Klingon outpost under attack by the Romulans. Now, I think as an audience member watching this for the first time, the wheels should be turning here. Like, they were trying to save a Klingon outpost. Even if you haven't quite figured out exactly what is going to happen, I think the wheels should be turning at this point. So Picard says that the exchange of fire that Garrett had with the Romulans was likely the catalyst for the formation of the Time Rift. How? How did just having an exchange of fire create a Time Rift? There's exchanges of fire all the time, and there's no Time Rift created. But you know what? They don't really have time to explain it. That would take away too much from the scene. So I get it. It's fine. I just like to poke fun. Anyways, Picard says that it's a shame he didn't succeed because could have maybe prevented 20 years of war. And this is really when the audience should be like, oh, okay. I see what you're laying down. I'm picking up what you're laying down here. So, but Picard's saying that he's got to kind of see that Guinan is right? He's kind of got to see that that ship's got to go back. I mean, obviously he still hasn't made that decision, but speaking of wheels turning in the head, it should be turning for him. He should start be thinking about that at this point. Like he's got to see that Guinan has some points here. He's got to make those connections there. Then we cut to a scene with Tasha and Castillo, and Tasha says to Commander Riker first, they're on the bridge of the Enterprise C, she says to Commander Riker, advise Lieutenant LaForge that shields are below minimum. Lieutenant LaForge? So I was like, oh, maybe he's a lieutenant in the alternate timeline. However, we see him later, and he definitely has Lieutenant Commander Pips. So Denise Crosby done fucked up because he was a lieutenant the last time she was on the show. Nobody caught that though. They didn't catch that in post-production. That she said the wrong thing. He is not a lieutenant. He's a lieutenant commander. How dare they? What an egregious error! It ruins the whole episode. I, of course, am joking because this is my number 2. I really don't actually care. Again, it's just fun things to point out. Denise Crosby fucked it up. Anyway, so we get some exchange between Castillo and Yar. This is kind of the first real exchange that we see between them. Castillo is just kind of dumbfounded by this whole time travel concept, wondering what happened to his family and all this stuff. But Yar kind of keeps him on task and like, oh, we got this to do and that to do. But he keeps bringing it up again. And Tasha kind of goes along with it. She tells him about the war, and he says that, oh, yeah, they were negotiating a peace treaty when I left. Again, things are turning. Now, this was written before the Undiscovered Country, but I will echo what my brother said on one of his recent Next Generation reviews. Forget which one it was. Oh, I think it was Outrageous Arcana because Worf was like, because the Worf had a line that kind of implied that peace between the Federation and the Klingons had happened. No, it wasn't Arcana. No, I'm sorry. It was the dude, the bearded dude, the deaf guy. Loud as a whisper. That's the one. Because he implied that that the peace between the Federation and the Klingons were helped by that guy, Riva, which would have been recent. And my brother said, well, it happened before Undiscovered Country was written, and he kind of came up with some fan-splaining, some logic of how that could work. And I actually agree with him 100%. And basically that you could kind of piece it together because there's no saying that the events of Undiscovered Country created a lasting peace, because that was based on the destruction of the Praxis moon, and that would have blown over after a while. Like it was probably the beginning of the road toward the peace that we see between the Federation and the Klingons all throughout the Next Generation. But there could have been other bumps in the road. There could have been other peace negotiations that happened. So you could still say that this all works. And I am totally fine with that. So then we get a brief scene of Picard talking to Data and realizing that sending them back, as Guinan had asked him to do, would be a death sentence. And this will set up for an even more powerful scene. I thought that scene before was really good. Whoa, the next scene that I'll get to in a little bit with Picard and Guinan is fucking incredible. Okay, so we go back to Picard, or rather, Yar and Castillo. Yar is giving him a tour. She tells him she's been on the Enterprise for 4 years, and she was straight out of the Academy. And ever since I've seen this episode for the first time, I am dumbfounded by this. Like, really? you were straight out of the academy. Was that also true in our timeline? So did she come straight out of the academy and was immediately lieutenant and the chief of security? Like I wish they didn't have that line because it doesn't make any sense. How could she have come straight out of the academy? In either timeline, honestly. But anyways, I digress. So they go into sickbay. Garrett tells Castillo to put emphasis on weapons because it sounds like the Enterprise could really use it for the war. And Tasha says, well, you will need them pretty soon because the Klingons are on their way. Garrett tells Castillo to coordinate with Tactical, which just happens to be Tasha Yar. And Tasha says, oh, that's me, Captain. So then Captain Garrett gets in an argument with Dr. Crusher about going back on duty, says her ship needs her now, basically tells Crusher to fuck off, and then she just goes back to duty. Anyways, so I do feel like Garrett was sort of the template for Janeway. She's very Janeway-esque in that scene, and just how she's so determined to fuck all the injuries. I don't care what any of you say, I'm going back to duty. You can't keep me off of duty. Fuck you. Janeway did this many times. This is very Janeway-esque. I can really easily picture Kate Mulgrew reading the same lines that Captain Garrett recited in this scene. In fact, Janeway probably has recited those same lines or something similar. But as far as her being like kind of the template for Janeway, this isn't surprising because when Janeway came along, there still hadn't had a lot of female captains in Star Trek. There had been very few. So the idea that they would base their main character, female captain, off of one that had already appeared, that is not surprising to me and is a good one. Captain Garrett is a good character. This is good characteristics that I really enjoy about Janeway. So if they kind of took a little bit of that from Captain Garrett, that's all the better for Janeway. Now, following up with this conversation with Data, Picard is now talking to Guinan, and this is that fucking scene is so good. And he immediately tells Guinan, I need more. And Guinan says she doesn't have any more. And Picard gets angry, starts banging on the table. How do I ask them to sacrifice themselves based solely on your intuition? To which Guinan replies, I don't know. But I do know this is a mistake. Every fiber in my being is saying this is a mistake. I can't explain it to myself, so I can't explain it to you. I only know that I am right. And Picard says, who is to say that this history is any less proper than the other? And Guinan says, I suppose I am. And that's a very bold statement for Guinan. That's like almost could come off as really arrogant from the wrong person. But Guinan is the right person to say that line because she really does have this extra perception of time, and Picard knows that she does. She has this special way of viewing the linear time. So yeah, she is the one who can say that I am the one who can say that this history is more proper or less proper than the other one. And this is where Picard has a great line. Not good enough, damn it! Not good enough! I will not ask them to die. Oh, Patrick Stewart is crushing it. It's so good. And Guinan's response is perfect. You couldn't have had a better response to that. I will not ask them to die. 40 billion people who all have already died. This war was not supposed to happen. So you're putting one little crew here against 40 billion people who were not supposed to die. Great comeback, Guinan, because that is very accurate and that's a really great point. But I can also see Picard's dilemma. I'm going to have to send these 120 people to their deaths and hope that it saves 40 billion people. I don't even know that it will. You could definitely see where Picard is coming from there. And that's why Patrick Stewart's performance is so powerful, because you can relate to his position there. Guinan ends by saying, now I've told you what you must do. You only have your trust in me to help you decide to do it. And then walks away leaving Picard to dwell on this. And we know when we see him next what effect that line had on him. Such a powerful line. I've told you what you must do. Now you must trust you. Your trust in me is the only thing to help you decide to do it. Oh, great fucking scene! Oh, great scene. Then we cut to Tasha talking to Castillo and 10 forward. Guinan walks in and looks at her funny, and then intense music starts. And Guinan is figuring something out about Tasha, and Tasha can pick up on it. And she asks Guinan if anything's wrong, and she says, "No, not a thing." But Tasha totally knows something is wrong. Guinan exit the scene for a little bit. I think she's still hanging out at the bar, but she's not on the scene. And we get a really tender scene between Castillo and Yar. And she calls him Lieutenant. And he's like, "We've known each other whole day. I won't salute if you won't." And he deduces her name was Tasha because that's what Guinan called him. And she accepts that. She accepts that it's okay for him to call her that. And then he says, "Most people call me Castillo, but my mother calls me Richard." And she says, "Okay, Castillo." And he pauses. And he says, "I think I'd like it better if you called me Richard." Tasha smiles and says, "Richard." And so it begins, and she gets a little smile on her, and we get to see a little chemistry starting. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I thought that this was very well played and not overdone, not overemphasized, this little romance that they have. So Guinan actually, I'm sorry, Tasha's walking out to the senior staff meeting. She's called to the senior staff, and she glances back at Guinan. And you can still see that something is going on here. So now Picard has called a meeting of the senior staff, and we see that Guinan's words did have an effect on him, and he informs the senior staff that he's going with Guinan's recommendation, and he's going to go ahead and send the Enterprise C back in hopes of preventing the Klingon War from ever happening. So there are lots of people who object, but especially Riker. Riker is the biggest voice of dissent. He insists that we would be asking 125 people to go back and die meaningless deaths. And Data, with that android logic, cuts in and says, "Well, not necessarily, Commander, because the Klingons value honor above all else, so a Federation ship sacrificing their lives in an attempt to save Klingons can be considered a meaningful act of honor by the Klingon Empire." And Picard adds, "Even the deaths could have prevented this war." And we, the audience, now go, "Oh, okay, that's what happened in the original timeline. That is, in fact, what happened. The Klingons saw it as an act of honor. And it's as if they were already in peace negotiations at that point, then that would have done wonders for their peace negotiations. The Federation having a ship that sacrificed itself for the Klingons and died in honor, I mean, that would have sealed the deal. So I think we as the audience can now figure out exactly what happened. And I love that they never explicitly state it, that they give us the clues and trust in us to be smart enough to piece together. Again, they're really trusting in their fans. And that might be another reason why I really love this episode, the trust that they show, the faith that they show in us, that, yeah, we can figure it out on our own. Anyways, so then Crusher and LaForge are talking on their way out of this briefing, and Crusher says, "We may not even be in an alternate timeline." And Geordi says, "Who even knows if we're even dead or alive?" And Tasha overhears this, and that music starts playing. And she gets this concerned look on her face. Who knows if we're dead or alive? On the turbo lift, Data notices that Tasha's preoccupied. In fact, he says, I believe I am interpreting your facial expression to say you are preoccupied with something unpleasant. And Tasha tries to pretend she's just worrying about Castillo, and she doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And Data says, "We may never know what happens. If they succeed, we will never know if we may never know that these events even ever occurred." And which that's um, that's a powerful line because we, the audience, look at Tasha and know she definitely wouldn't know if these events occurred or not because she's dead. So that's kind of eerie that Data says that line. So then we cut to Picard talking to Captain Garrett on the bridge of the Enterprise C. She admits that many of her crew have been asking about going back. Some of them because they can't bear to live without their loved ones, like what Castillo was talking about, but also because they don't like the idea of slipping away in the middle of a fight. Um, and this is where Picard kind of confesses in this really whispered tone. The war is going far worse than is generally known. Starfleet may have no choice but to surrender within 6 months. So now we're getting okay, this is really dire. So this has probably had an effect on Picard's decision as well, that things may be really bad in a few months. So if they have any hope at all at changing the timeline, then maybe this is his opportunity to do that. He has a great line to Garrett where he says, "One ship will make no difference in the here and now, but could make all the difference 22 years ago." Love it. Garrett then tells Castillo to tell the crew that they're going back. Castillo is like, "Yes, sir." And like, he seems happy about it. So he must have been one of those people she was referring to that was kind of itching to get back. So then Picard leaves. Tasha stays to talk to Castillo. She's desperately trying to help him, give him advice, but they both know, it's pointless. He's going to die. But both actors play this very well. And this is where he gives that line that I don't know, it should be really cheesy, but somehow it works for me. It was like, if you go walk into a room and see a man, say in his 50s, giving a long, hard look at life. I mean, I don't know. It is kind of a cheesy line, but I think just the chemistry between these two characters is so strong that somehow he sells it and somehow it works. They don't get all that many scenes together, so they got to make every scene count, and both actors are able to do that. And Christopher McDonald, he proves that he can play something other than just an asshole or bad guy or silly villain in a comedic movie. So this was a good romance, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as we get more into it. Before Tasha can leave, though, the Klingon ship attacks, and then Captain Garrett is killed, and Tasha has informed Captain Picard of that. So Castillo goes to the Enterprise D. He's talking to Picard. He tells him he's ready to lead this crew back to the battle with the Romulans. Riker once again, the voice of dissent, but Picard gives Castillo the go-ahead. Then another moment between Castillo and Yara in the transporter room. And again, both actors are playing this really well. And this is when they kiss. Now, Star Trek has often had two characters who only met like a day ago fall in love and they kiss, and more often than not it's a forced romance that's just put in there for plot convenience because the writers want to have this romance, so they force feed one. And Star Trek has done that many times. But this is not one of those. This is believable because of the urgency of the situation, and because one of them is about to go off to sure death. So they have to kind of fast track their their relationship and give a kiss because they may not ever have another chance again. They got to seize the moment, so they don't have time to wait for the romance to naturally develop into a full-blown romance. So it makes total sense. And again, I'll say both actors really sell it well. So I did put this, I believe it was number 2 or 3. I think it was number 3 on my best romance list, my top 10 romance list in Star Trek. because the actor sees every moment and make it count, even though the characters don't really have all that much screen time together overall. So it really works. So Castillo beams back to the Enterprise C. Tasha then goes directly to Guinan to confront her, and she asks, "What's happened to me in the other timeline?" Guinan at first is trying to deflect it, saying, "I don't have complete biographies of all the crew. I don't know any of the details, just like I told Picard. It's just a feeling." But Tasha pushes her a little bit, and she says, "Yeah, but there's something more when you look at me. I can just see it. We've known each other too long." And that's when Guinan has the line, "We weren't supposed to know each other at all." I'm like, oh no. And so then that's where she tells her, "You're supposed to be dead," and tells her it was a senseless death. And now I want to take this time to talk about the origins of the writing and why this is such brilliant writing and how it became such brilliant writing. But so the Yesterday's Enterprise script was submitted by basically a fan, because Michael Piller had opened it up to just anybody to submit scripts when he became head writer at the beginning of season 3. A controversial decision, to be sure, but kind of worked out for them. So there was, let me see if I can see his name, Trent Christopher Ganino. Sent in the original script for Yesterday's Enterprise, and then submitted it to some dude named Eric Stillwell, and then the two men ended up working on the script together. And the original Yesterday's Enterprise had nothing to do with Tasha Yar, had nothing to do with an alternate timeline. It was just simply the Enterprise C coming into the future. And the dilemma was that the Enterprise D had to prevent them from finding out where they are. And then some ensign finds out or something, and they got to decide what to do. And then at the same time, separate from this, Denise Crosby was wanting to come back to the show because she realized the show was good now, and that maybe she could actually get some screen time. Starting to regret probably having left, and she just waited a little while. Things might have gotten better for her, but she wants to come back and do an episode. So they got to figure out a way to get her in. And they were also thinking they wanted to bring back a legacy character, original character. And while they thought Leonard Nimoy, they were like, well, we can't get him because he's too busy. So we can get Mark Leonard. So we're going to do a Sarek thing. So the original idea was an episode with somehow I had Tasha Yar and Sarek in it, and they go back into the Guardian of Forever, and some timey-wimey stuff happens or something. I didn't quite really get it. And then they decided, we're not going to do that. And they decided to put Sarek in his own episode having nothing to do with time travel, which, of course, airs later in the 3rd season. And with Tasha Yar, they were like, why don't we combine her story with the Yesterday's Enterprise story? Let's put her in that. Let's say that an alternate timeline gets created when the Enterprise C comes through, and that's how Tasha Yar comes back. So they kind of combined the two ideas. And then Ronald D. Moore got his hands on this, and that's where the Klingon War comes from, because of course it is. It's Ronald D. Moore. Of course there's a war. But what the result of all of this, all of this creative process from all these different people. Also, Michael Piller himself had a hand in coming up with some of these ideas. This collaborative effort, what you end up with is the most ingenious, brilliant way you possibly could have ever brought in Tasha Yar back, because there were a million ways to screw this up. There were a million ways to just have Tasha Yar be there just for the sake of it, for her appearance to just be kind of pointless, just to be like, ooh, look at Tasha Yar. I mean, they could have screwed this up a million different ways, but instead they came up with this brilliant story where she has to directly confront her death. And she should. If they're going to bring her back, then have her confront the fact that she had a senseless death, which was a complaint of many fans, that the death was pointless. And to have the character herself be faced with that, I died a senseless death. Oh, so good! So good. So yeah, the result of this long creative process with all these different writers, starting with a script from some dude, and Ronald D. Moore getting in it, Michael Piller getting in it, and they create this incredible story for Tasha Yar, and Denise Crosby is fantastic, fantastic in this episode. So she then goes to Picard and asks for a transfer to the Enterprise C. So Yar goes to Picard and she tells him all about what Guinan's told her, and Picard's like, she felt it necessary to tell you this, and Tasha's like, I felt it necessary, and Picard's like, I see, which is absolutely true. Tasha got it out of her, and that's what she tells Picard. So Picard is objecting, and this is when Tasha gives that speech about how she has died, the senseless death that Guinan told her about in the other timeline. And she's like, I don't like the sound of that, Captain. Denise Crosby, so good. So good. And she's like, I really want my death to count for something. Again, a really powerful scene. I cried a little bit on my rewatch. A little bit of a tear. I'm not tears pouring down, but it's very touching. Also, it gives fans that satisfaction that she gets to have a meaningful death this time, although she doesn't end up dying because Denise Crosby wanted to come back again. They had to, come up with another way to bring her back. And the next time they come up with a way to bring her back, it's not nearly as good. The whole idea of Sela is dumb. It is just stupid. And the fact that she looks just like Tasha Yar, except she has pointy ears. But I guess they had to have some way to bring her back. But definitely their idea of bringing Denise Crosby back here is a gazillion times better than their next idea. But I guess they can't all be winners. I mean, you can't always have yesterday's Enterprise idea. So whatever. Anyways, I digress. Fans get the meaningful death for Tasha that they have always wanted. So then Yar goes to the Enterprise C, reports to Castillo for duty. He rejects her, saying they're not coming back. This isn't a joke. Says he doesn't want her there. I mean, he doesn't want her to sacrifice herself. And the way that Christopher McDonald delivers the line, it's very clear. It's not like he doesn't want her there because he doesn't like her. He doesn't want her there because he doesn't want her to sacrifice herself. And she says, you need me at tactical. There's no one else in the crew who can do it better than I can. And he agrees and tells her to take her station. So then a couple of Klingon ships, of course, attack. I say, of course, because you got to have some tension for this scene, and it works really well. And Riker has a line about the Klingons they don't even bother to cloak. And he says, that's a lot of confidence after the pasting we gave them in Archer 4. That's an interesting name for I'm not sure if it's a system or a planet. But that's an interesting name, Archer 4, considering that this is 10 years before Star Trek Enterprise. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Jonathan Archer was already in canon, but I was pretty sure that they invented the whole NX-01 bullshit for Enterprise. Like, I think the original idea that the set 1701 under Captain April and then Captain Pike and then Captain Kirk, that was the very original Enterprise. And I think the whole NX-01 and Captain Archer thing was thought of for the show 10 years later. And if I'm right about that, then this episode is far better than what Lower Decks ever did. I mean, Lower Decks has nothing on the Next Generation, because Lower Decks, they get some deep cuts to just do some really obscure Star Trek references. Here we have Next Generation making a reference that no one's even thought of yet. They're predicting the future by naming a planet or a star system after Jonathan Archer, even though he hasn't even been invented yet. Unless I'm wrong about that, and he's in canon. I'm pretty sure he wasn't. I'm pretty sure he was invented for Enterprise, the show, Star Trek Enterprise. So anyway, we get into one of my favorite Picard speeches. This is different from all of his other speeches. Usually he's giving moral type speeches. This is kind of a pre-battle speech, which Picard rarely ever gives, but it's a good one because it's fucking Picard. So he ends with the line, "Let's make sure history never forgets the name Enterprise." Ties in with the title of the episode, ties in with the themes. So good. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Then, of course, we get this big, exciting battle. Things are looking really dire. Riker dies. The camera zooms in onto this creepy image of his dead body with blood coming off. And like, oh my God, Riker's dead. The Klingons are asking for surrender. This is where they could have slipped Worf in. See, it wouldn't have made sense. Like, to distract from this and have Worf there wouldn't have made sense. So I like that they didn't do that, even though originally that was what I thought they should have done. So Klingons ask for surrender. Picard says, "That'll be the day," and leaps over to tactical, takes over, firing desperately at the Klingons. Maybe buys the Enterprise C just a little bit more time, but things are looking really bad. And they don't show Yar and Castillo on the Enterprise C. They're focusing on the D, and I prefer it that way. Like, again, as I said about why they couldn't cut away to Worf and make Worf the captain of the other ship, that you got to focus on Picard here. And so brilliant choices all throughout this episode. Anyways, everything looks lost. Things look bad. But just in the nick of time, the Enterprise C goes through the anomaly, and then we're back to normal, and then Worf is back, and then Counselor Troy is back. By the way, Counselor Troy also not in this episode, which makes sense, because why would there be a counselor on a warship? She's back, Worf is back, and then Picard has a line that I had never noticed before. I have never picked up on this. Out of like the 200 times I've seen this episode, the first time that I noticed it was yesterday. When I watched this episode in preparation for this video, I noticed something I have never noticed before, and that is Picard says to the helm, "Set a course for Archer 4." Archer 4, of course, being the planet or system that Riker said that they gave a pasting to in the alternate time. They gave a pasting to the Klingons in that alternate timeline. But in the regular timeline, they're going to Archer 4. The place named after a Starfleet captain who hasn't even been thought of yet. This is the Star Trek writers seeing and predicting the future, making a reference that hasn't even been invented yet. Anyways, so at this point, a guy named calls the bridge to make sure everything is okay. Picard and Riker are a little puzzled. Why are you calling? And then everything's fine. And the guy and they ask a guy, "And everything okay?" "Yeah, I think it is." A guy has now realized that everything's back, and I don't think she really remembers what happened. I think when we see her talk about it in Redemption Part 2, that she doesn't fully remember, which would be consistent with how they did it and earlier in this episode, that she has feelings but doesn't fully remember. But she knows Tasha had something to do with it, so she calls Geordi over. Now, if I wanted to be really nitpicky, I could say, why is Geordi in 10 forward right now? Because the last we saw this timeline, Picard had just called all the senior staff to the bridge. Now, Geordi is not a bridge officer. However, if something is so important to call all the senior staff to the bridge, Geordi's going to be in engineering. Like, whether Picard required him to be, Geordi would be like, "Oh, something important's happening. I better get my ass down to engineering." He wouldn't be lounging around having a drink at 10 forward. However, I'm gonna let this pass because the plot requires it. Because Guinan's got to talk to somebody. Like, she's got to have that conversation with someone, and everyone else is on the bridge, And she can't call him some random, like, lieutenant junior grade wearing a blue uniform. He's like, Tasha Yar, I don't know who the fuck that is. I mean, she has to get Jordy, so sure. But anyways, it's a great ending. It's a great ending. She says, tell me about Tasha Yar. And he's like, and da da da, and you get the credits. So good. So good. So there you have it. This amazing episode of Star Trek that is, for me, my second favorite episode in the entire franchise, or at least the old shows. If you want to see my modern Trek top 25, that's a different video. Please go watch that. I just put out my modern Trek top 25. Now, as for what's coming up next, I only have one video left of my top 100. Can you believe it? I've been doing this since May, and one video left. Well, technically two videos, because I also have a picture clue for my number one, and then the video for my number one. Both of those will be in December. Stay tuned for the exact dates. I will give you a calendar video at the beginning of December where I will tell you the exact dates in which I will drop those videos. A lot of stuff happening in December. My end of the year festivities are going on. So please subscribe if you have not already, and check out all my top 100 videos. There's a whole playlist of it on my channel, so go check out all that stuff. And I will see you really soon, everybody. Goodbye.